That is footage that I shot that is currently being used throughout the feature-length documentary called The Jewel Thief, which is now available to stream on Hulu. So I was LA's second unit cinematographer for that documentary. But the main reason I want to break this down is because it's very quite simple to do these kind of shots. For this documentary, the A-cam, the first unit camera was the Sony FX9 with Zeiss super speeds. So they knew I owned the A7S III, and they knew I had an abundance of my own vintage glass, right? So I showed up with a Pelican just full of all of my Leica Rs and Minolta Rocore lenses. And, did a quick test with things there in, my little tiny set there. I had a little tiny G&E crew, like a gaffer and a couple grips and me. So the three lenses that I used for these shots was the Leica R 50mm Summicron version 2, the Leica R 28mm El Merit version 1, and a 1978 Minolta Rocore 35mm f1.8, the MD Mark II, surprisingly enough. So those were the three lenses that I used. I wish I could recall what lenses were used on what shots, but I just can't. I did this way back in February, but at least yes, I was cutting an MD Mark II Rocore with two different versions of Leica Rs, one being a version 1 and one being a version 2. And so, it doesn't matter. So don't get caught up in serial numbers and codings because ultimately it all comes down to the color grade. Now, if we do want to address my color grade, these are not the same exact clips that they use in the documentary. I mean, it's the same footage, but I put my own color grade on it. And I did a very quick, hasty grade on it. So don't, rake me over the coals too bad. Whereas on the actual show, if you watch it, my footage is used all throughout the documentary, by the way. They did their own grade on it. They made it look a little grittier, they made it a little dirtier, they did their thing with it, right? Because it is FBI surveillance footage, right? So they wanted to give it that kind of aesthetic. The FX9 and Zeiss super speeds never came in and did anything in the FBI surveillance world. So that world was mine and mine only. Again, that's another sign of a second unit DP. Now, one thing about this is because it was kind of ultra low budget project, I wasn't able to request certain G&E items that I usually normally like to use or that I keep in my own G&E 1-ton minivan. That wasn't part of the rate being offered, so I didn't show up with my van, right? But when I get there, there were certain things that I was requesting that they just didn't have. For instance, a 4x4 magic cloth. Now, if I would have had the foresight to think about that, I would have just taken a couple of my favorite rags and threw them in my bag with me and brought them with me. So that's something to keep in mind, Let's get into this because I do want to show the very small amount of gear that we had and what you can accomplish with that, right? This is a very moody thing, but this is very simple to do. And it is a slightly different setup from shot to shot. Also, before we get into the footage, these are stills that I took and that they used in the documentary as well for one part of it. And funny enough, I shot these stills with my Sony RX1R Mark II. So yeah, this little camera here, I've done a full video on this. I absolutely love this camera. If you're into Leica Q2 or Q3, I am going to be renting a Q3 as soon as it becomes available to do so here in LA, and I'm going to be comparing that to this RX1R Mark II. I've done a full video on this. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. I know this is a quick cutaway, but this thing is amazing. 42 megapixels, backside illuminated CMOS sensor, amazing little camera, and that's why I used it on this job. Because 42 megapixels it's actually an 8K resolution sensor. That camera is insane for how tiny it is, and that the Zeiss lens that is affixed to it is a one of a kind, only available for that camera. So these are just some quick stills here that I took with the RX1, and they did use these in the doc, so you'll have to check it out. Okay, so here's some behind the scenes. So you'll see we had two of these Amaran light mats. Now we shot this way back in February, and this is the first time I got to use these. I was really impressed by these Amarans. And you'll notice I do have the diffusion on there, and I do have the 50-degree 8-crate grid. But you'll notice in here as well, this is a little bit of duvetine right here that I had them kind of, you'll notice that's camera side, right? Because the camera's right here, okay? It was like too much, like coming down. I tried to control the contrast as much as I can, and I don't want the light leaking all over on top of the camera, right? That's really all it was. So rather than flagging it off and bringing another C-stand in here, let's just wrap the front part of that, like the first quarter of the light mat, and just wrap it in duvetine to kind of block off that spill that's falling directly down on top of the camera and on camera side. And we'll look at the grabs here in a minute. Back here is another light mat, I believe, but I also had some Astera Titan tubes that I could use, and then you'll see what we do when I couldn't get magic cloth in there. But this is the general setup. You see how tiny this little tiny area is, okay? So here's another one. This is just a little angle. You can see the little tiny A7S III there. I was using my Small HD Indy 5. You know, I monitor exposure with the EL zone. I've done a full demo on the EL zone. Okay, so I'll leave a link to that down below if you don't know how to use that. It's amazing for any camera that can shoot log, right? So you feed the pipeline, you feed the color pipeline to the Small HD monitor into the EL zone exposure tool, and it basically turns any camera that can shoot log, it turns it into a spot meter, like a real spot meter. You know, some people think false color is works like a spot meter, but it doesn't. It's not working off of the value of light. It's working off of value of voltage. So I've talked about that enough in a past demo video, full demo video. So if you're new to the EL zone, you don't know anything about it, I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. So this is kind of the same setup shot here. This is me using the little RX1 on set, such a tiny little camera. Some of the producers were kind of laughing, but I, you know, me being kid tech, I had to quickly educate them on, you know, the tool, you know, just because it looked tiny, you know, I had to like blow their minds a little bit. And sure enough, people are looking at it up on B&H wanting to buy it. And you see me there, I'm about to pull out my Sekonic 800, my color meter. And here we go. So now we're with the producers here, just, you know, we're going in for the tight shot. And you see how, you know, low-key, low-budge this is. I got my own little follow focus on there. And let's see if we can see what lens that is. Oh, you know what? That was with the macro. That's the 60mm Leica R L Merit Macro version 1. Also, what you'll see here, this frame. So I couldn't get magic cloth, but what they could offer was a 4x4 of opal. And you'll notice there too, a little beadboard, and that was just to help out, just a little tiny push, right? Some of the grips are bringing in a tube to kind of try to push tube from the side, and no, we don't want that. We just want a nice soft push with the beadboard. I'm always trying to avoid situations where it looks lit, and we're gonna look at some scenarios of that. Now here you see another setup here, the Amaran, and I double broke it. So what's going on in this particular circumstance, this is the same shot, right? This is the macro. This is the 60mm macro. You can see the shot. You saw that in the opening footage. So don't forget, there is another light mat above us. And then this one is like cranked at an angle. And then we have the opal softening that off. And the little B-board just providing a little something this way. And this way it's just going all black. And of course, haze. Haze everywhere. Haze to help lift the blacks. Because we are shooting this in S-Log3, S-Gamut 3 Cine. You got the Sony A7S III, which, you know, is very, very good in low light. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, if you look off just this way, you'll see another little B-board here of something, right? Pushing this way too. So I'm kind of like wrapping everything, because don't forget, you still got this light mat above. And the light mat above is pushing out a little more than this backlight, because the above light is the key. This one in the back is more like the fill. And then I'm using these B-boards to help wrap everything, keeping everything on one side. So you notice I don't have anything going on over here. Eventually, some of the shots, I had a floppy that we would walk in and out. I'm mentioning that because you never want to like bring this bounce and put it over here. Then you have a bounce on this side and bounce on this side. It's going to end up very flat. So in order to maintain the contrast and maintain the shape of your image, the idea is to keep all the light on one side, keep everything coming this way, right? And notice this way, this is where we walk the floppy in and out depending on how bad we want to crunch that side. But you can notice on the screen, and you saw the footage in the opening sequence there, you see how tight of a close-up shot this is. And you know, you just gauge how close the negative fill is depending on, you know, whatever you're capturing, right? You can leave that open to taste. And then here's just one closer down low here. So now the world has flipped a little bit because this is a different setup, right? This is a different thing. This is a different machine. So now the B-board is on this side. You'll notice I'm using the focus peaking there just to make sure we're sharp. And if I come up here, there's a B-board directly floating across in front to get a little bit of a front push, because this is really down. We're really down and dirty here, even though it doesn't look like it, right? And I always talk about this on my Patreon. It takes light to make things look not bright, right? Like people see a dark scene, and the first thing you want to think is like, oh my God, there must be no lights. But the reality is, right, if you're doing a nighttime scene or you're doing a dark, moody scene, you know, if you're doing it correctly, there actually is a lot more light going on than, you know, the audience is aware of. It actually takes light to make it look not bright, if that makes any sense at all. Because you need some sort of light, right? But you're constantly just trying to dumb it down. You're constantly softening it down. And that was the whole reason for me, you know, requesting the magic cloth. Because something like a magic cloth will cut your light by 3.5 stops, right? So then the light just kind of falls. It just like little mist particles, like the light, you know, if you could imagine such a thing. And that's kind of what you're trying to do in any nighttime scene, any dark, moody scene. You just want the light to appear that it's there the same way that, you know, our eyes would make it appear. You know, the great greatest trick that the cinematographer can pull is making the image appear as if it would appear if you were standing there with your own eyes, right? So the trick is to make the camera do what our eyes do. And in the reality of that, wherever you would be naturally, it's not a film set world. There are no film lights. But our eyes have some amazing dynamic range and they have amazing capabilities. And so, you're trying to replicate that world of natural, right? But that takes a lot of manpower and a lot of resources and a lot of work and time. Let us get back into this. So you'll notice also here I put some duve directly under it because you'll notice the table that they gave me to work on, it's plastic. Okay, so plastic is going to reflect light. It's going to bounce. And it's also, it's not dark, right? So those two things, I was like, oh, let's get some duve in here. Let's throw it underneath this and kind of help that light like bouncing back up from the bottom, right? That's why when you see guys doing big day exteriors, you'll see like 20 by 20s of black just laying on the ground because they're helping absorb. They don't want anything bouncing back up on the talent's face, if they're not going for that kind of vibe. And you can see there perfectly up top here, we do have the opal frame up above. So it was the Amaran with its diffusion and acrylic grid, then the 4x4 opal, just helping trying to soften it as the light's coming down. And the opal wasn't doing quite as much as I would have liked it to done, but still it's better than not having it at all, right? And here you can see both light mats working. Okay, now we're gonna open this one real quick and we're just gonna skim through this. This is kind of the same setup here, right? Now I'm like super close and now I'm contradicting everything I just said, right? Because now you notice I do have a bounce on both sides. There's one here, super close, and there's one way over here. But again, it just goes like, what are we trying to do with the shot? As you can clearly see, look how close the lens is. I can tell by looking at that lens that is the Leica R 28mm L Merit version 1, right? I can tell because it's got the little lens hood on it, but I'm ultra close. Look how close I am to the product with the 28mm, right? And we're going for a specific look, which was, established between myself and the DP. And now if we kind of look at the footage, now keep in mind, I did my own grade on this. This is gonna look pretty significantly different than what you see in the documentary, which this footage is used all throughout. Just playing around with different angles. I shot there all night, giving them different stuff. You got the FBI guys in here. Here you can really see what the haze is doing. The haze is helping lift the blacks. And you'll notice, I did my best to give it that kind of interrogation lighting setup. Just one solo light dropping from above. Trying my best to keep everything camera side down and keeping the light coming this way. Here's one example where I really wish I could have had the magic cloth, because in this example, I think I'm revealing too much of where my source is. So if you don't know how to look for this, right, this right here is lit up quite not ideally. And the problem was I just couldn't get it soft enough to keep in balance with what I'm balancing to, because it's overpowering him. Now, I could have easily put a power window in Resolve on this piece back here and just brought that down a little bit, which I should have done before I did this video, but I didn't. And it's good that I didn't, right? Because now we get to see, because a simple power window in Resolve, you could just bring just this section down a little bit and help hide the light, because our focus is here and he's pretty good for this dimly lit, moody situation. On the day though, I was really struggling to get, something in here to help soften that, to help bring it down without killing what's on our guy here. And the opal just wasn't giving it enough. Again, Magic Cloth is gonna cut your light close to 4 stops of light loss. That's why if you are using Magic Cloth, you need to have a lot of firepower or be working with a camera like the A7S III that can work with low amounts of light, depending on what kind of fixture you're using. Because those Amarans are nice, they're impressive, but put a Magic Cloth in front of it with it already having its A-crate grid and its own diffusion on, you're gonna lose a lot of output out of those little Amarans. So maybe it was better that we didn't have the Magic Cloth, we just used the opal, but still, again, this could easily be saved in post. Just put a little power window there. But I hope you can tell what I'm talking about. It's really revealing the source. On the day, you're like, okay, yeah, it's just like top down, like you said, interrogation lighting. But again, it's just a little too hot for my taste for the rest of the scene, right? It's pulling the eye away when it shouldn't be doing that. Okay, and now this one. This one, you can see it's super soft. This one is super, super soft. And this is what I'm talking about. This, to me, is executed more to what I was after, right? So we have the light mat above, and it's just getting super softened up with that opal. And, it just feels, this to me is a prime example of light just falling on the subject. There's nothing here that's like exposing the source, and it should, because we have all these little metal bits. This thing is really reflective and wild, and it's all bright metal, but nothing is really revealing the source, because I just kept softening it, you tweak it, you keep tweaking it. Let's bring the opal closer. As we lower the opal closer to the product, because this is like a top-down shot now, so we can bring it closer, and you're just working that against how much level you're giving out of the light mat, and then you're just kind of massaging how close you're getting the beadboard there. And then we have this crazy one. This was the macro shot that we looked at. So this one got a little hot from above too, but because it was so close up, and because the other lenses, well, certainly the 50 and the 35, those are, 1.8 and f2. Now when we're on the 60 and the 28, now we're at an f2.8. So I'm also having to balance those levels across to try to maintain some sort of consistency. If you guys have been on the channel, you know that I use both a light meter and a color meter. That's just how I roll. But you can see it is revealing. Again, I talked about the reflectiveness of the top down, and this is the same machine here, I believe. And it just, it's got a little bit too much reflectiveness there, and it's just exposing that a little too much. Here, though, nice massage. This is an example of, the floppy being really close up on top of us and just letting the light come this way and come into us, rather than just like blasting it from the front, and then you would lose all this shape. And then this one is super, super down, right? This is like super grungy down. When I was going in to do this, all I could think about was like the movie Seven, like the opening sequence of Seven, this kind of like grittiness, this guy, even though this isn't nearly the same vibe as that, this was just my own kind of like thinking of it, and also like knowing like it is going to be grungy, right? Now here's another one. Now, this was a green screen shot. So down here, this old TV, this is a little green screen here. And I did some other footage for them that night too, of a guy out in the rain. And so I just put that footage on this little TV just for the sake of this demo. My key replacement here is not as good as what they would do on the show. But this is another example of that kind of top-down interrogation room lighting. And a lot of it, I was kind of battling with the notebook, right? Because it's so white. And right here, he's a little hot, but it's okay. It still looks a little natural to me. And we did put a little bit of bounce on the table, and that's how we're getting this uplight on his chin. I'm just looking for little areas of detail where I can make him pop out, right? So the chin down here, his hand here, so we're not completely just losing him. And I was worried about both the TV and that white notebook kind of overpowering him, but I think it turned out okay. Again, it's just massaging, the closer you get that diffusion, just not the light, but the diffusion. The closer you can get that diffusion to whatever you're photographing, it's going to keep softening it out. It's going to keep billowing it out, kind of, And this one is a little hot too, but notice how I did this. There's nothing here. The light is back here. Right? Notice on the table, you can see the table, it kind of like falls off this way. We keep this area right here kind of nice and interesting with the little tungsten reflection that it's getting off of the panel here on the machine. You're keeping all of that. And the only reason is because I didn't let the light mat come past the machine. If that light mat would have been, directly over the machine or this way, it wouldn't look nearly as nuanced as this, right? So I'm keeping the light mat back here, like behind the machine. And keep in mind, I had the first third of it blacked out with the Duvetine. Keeping that spill back there, keeping that kind of like overhead can interrogation light look, And whereas then it's just kind of slowly on them. And you can see he's getting a little tiny Rembrandt there on camera side cheek, right? So it's just barely coming in that way. And you're just getting a little bit on them because of the beadboard, keeping that kind of down. Now, again, I do think this is still a little hot just on the top of the machine. I don't mind the level of over here, but I think on the machine, again, you could do this, you could fix this with a power window in Resolve or something, and I just didn't take the time to do that for the sake of this demo. Again, I hastily graded these, but that's the idea. And of course, all the haze, the haze is helping, kind of help this. And also what I did, the first thing I did when I got there on set is I pulled the table really far away from the wall to, try to get up off that wall so we'd have more room, because we had the one light mat above and then we had another light mat kind of angled this way. And we just, if we would have kept things up against the wall, you just wouldn't be able to execute that. And also by keeping it further away, you can keep it kind of soft. Here's a top down of the other machine. You can just see all the different angles. And then this one is really, really grungy and gritty. And that may be a part of my grade too, but I want us to kind of pay attention to the light, how it's hitting this guy, how it's hitting our friend here, the shoulder here, even our guy here, right? And this is a little hard because he's got a super bright canary yellow shirt on, right? So it's competing a little bit with where we should be looking at here. But overall, you know, I think the level on him and based upon the mood, it's like a push and pull, you know, it's like, what are we trying to convey? What are we trying to do here? And what is the mood of this thing? And keeping with the original aesthetic of the like interrogation room style lighting, even though I know this is just like FBI surveillance, but the mood is what it was, right? Like that is what we were kind of going for, this kind of interrogation kind of lighting setup, if you will. And then this, you know, the iconic, you know, just these kind of shots like this, and this one, just a slow, these are all locked off too. So it's just a slow tilt and pan at the same time. I always keep my tripod heads loose. The tilt is always open and the pan is always open, and that way I can just kind of willy-nilly at any direction I want, and that's how you're kind of able to do this little like slow down angle thing. And then of course that one. And this one is very hot from above. This is a very reflective machine, but at least we are kind of falling off into the dark on one side. Again, this one may be revealing the source too much, but again, keeping with that idea of this kind of specific interrogation room lighting. I know I keep saying that, but that is the kind of vibe of this, you know, just one single can light from above. That's the idea that we're trying to convey with this, and hopefully that was able to come across that way. You can get by just doing simple stuff like that, but again, you would need a camera that can kind of see in the dark a little bit, and that helps you out being able to kind of push the limits of what you can do. And that's why so many docs are shot on Sony, certainly here in LA. I mean, in any doc that I've ever been the gaffer on, they're always shooting on the Sony's, you know, FX6, FX9 nowadays. And before those cameras, it was, you know, what, the FS7s, you know, so it's kind of the gist of this thing. But I just wanted to do it to just kind of talk about the second unit stuff, because second unit is so chill. It's so super relaxed, both in my experience with this and from my acting days of being second unit on Gotham. Like, it's just super low key, super relaxed. It's not nearly as hectic as like first unit. And even though first unit may be like cool and that may be the ultimate goal, honestly, if I was given the choice to just always be second unit DP, I think I would do it. I think I would take it, unless for a movie, like an indie feature, then I would probably want to be the main DP. But when you're talking about things like this, very fast-paced environments, it's second unit all the way. It's always nice. It's always enjoyable. This job was awesome, so I do want to give a shout-out to everyone who brought me on board with this one. And hopefully, you know, I'm not stepping out of line with this, but it's already out. You know, it's already on Hulu, so I don't think I'm doing anything wrong by showing the footage because they've already shown it, right? I just think it's a fun thing to do here on the channel, and I hope you guys were able to get something out of this. Here's the thing, if you're into these styles of videos, this is what I do every week over on the Dog Times Patreon, and I have to give a shout out to this month's Patreon producers. Shout out to all of them and just all of the Patreon members. You know, Patreon is my #1 kind of, I guess, quote unquote sponsor, right? Because I specifically don't cater to companies, and I specifically don't really respond to sponsor me emails because I don't really care about that. Thank you all for watching. If you're new here, please consider tapping that subscribe button. I do a little bit of everything here. And I know the YouTube algorithm hates me for that, right? Some weeks I'll put out a street photography POV video, and those get 0 views. And then I'll put out a review video that I kind of don't even want to do, and those get thousands of views. And then videos like this kind of hit somewhere in the middle. Anyways, it's all things indie filmmaking. That's just how it rolls here. And I've been working full-time in this industry for 13 years, so take it as you will. And thank you all for the support, and we'll see you in the next one. All right. Oh, God. This is why I hate camera straps. They just get in the way.